Hi, everybody. My name is Ronit Tsadok. I'm a rabbi at Ikar.
And I'm Rachel Nussbaum. I am the rabbi of Kavanah in Seattle.
And we are excited to have learned together and learn together with you in the wee hours of the morning or whenever it is that you are enjoying this session. Our focus is the eighth Dibra, the eighth commandment, which is Lo Tignov, thou shalt not steal. 2 words, not a lot to work with, seems pretty straightforward, but we wanted to consider, what do these words have to offer? What does this concept of not stealing have to offer most of us who I think on a daily basis are not going about taking things from other people in a way that we shouldn't? And so a little bit of reframing, perhaps, digging into some rabbinic concepts and some biblical concepts of Geneva today.
Awesome. Thank you, Ronit, for setting that up. So we're going to dig in first to the Tosefta of Baba Kama, where the rabbis begin to expand on this concept of Geneva. And we can see laid out pretty clearly here as the text begins. It says, Shiv'a Gnavim Hein. So there's 7 different kinds of theft, 7 different kinds of thievery. Harishon shebekulam, gonev dat habriot. And first and foremost among those is gonev dat habriot, one who steals, literally, steals the mind of their fellow human being. We're going to see that the rabbis are going to use gonev dat and gonev lev almost interchangeably as they talk about being able to take something from someone else, not in a physical sense, but in terms of manipulation or changing an understanding, playing on trust. And so then the text continues with a number of different examples here of what I think that kind of gonev dat might look like. One who insincerely invites another to their home. I invite you over, but I know that you're not going to be able to accept the invitation. And actually, I didn't even mean really that I wanted you to come, but I invite you to sort of get some social credit. One who plies another with gifts that they know they won't be able to accept. One who impresses their guest by opening a barrel of wine already sold to a vendor. So now I'm doing something just for show to kind of increase your esteem of me, which is the key, I think, there. One who has improper measures, one who lies regarding weights, one who adulterates their merchandise. All these different examples of ways that the rabbis are, sort of imagining that there is a kind of theft in the misrepresentation of oneself. Where do we have the biblical basis for this problem? I think is the how it's being phrased here. And the example that's drawn on is an example that we're going to look at in just a moment from Shmuel Bet. Vayiganev Avshalom et lev anshe Yisrael. Thus Avshalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So this is being used as the proof text here, or maybe the quintessential example of what it means to engage in this kind of manipulation. We thought it would be nice to take a deeper look at that text and who Avshalom was and what kind of heart stealing he was engaged in here.
Great. And if you are interested in following along on these texts, we do have a source sheet. Grateful to Rabbi Rachel for making the source sheet and putting all of these texts in front of us so easily. That is on Safaria, and so hopefully you can find a link to that if you're wondering what we're both looking at. So here's the text from Shmuel Bet, and in order to understand it, it's helpful to have a little bit of family context. So Avshalom is one of the sons of King David, and he is a beloved son of King David among the sons, but they've had a little bit of conflict before we get to chapter 15, which is where our selection and that proof text that Rachel talked about comes from. David and Avshalom have been having issues lately. It all really seems to have started when Avshalom's half-brother Amnon rapes their sister Tamar. And Avshalom and Tamar are especially close, but under the circumstances, of course, a terrible and egregious action taken by Amnon. And Avshalom eventually kills Amnon. David is distraught and does not agree to see Avshalom for a couple of years. So we understand there's a little bit of history and bad blood. And in the meantime, it seems like Avshalom and David have reconciled. Pick up chapter 15. Sometime afterward, after all of it, Avshalom provided himself with chariot, horses, and 50 outrunners. So Avshalom would get up early in the morning and he would stand on the road along the way to the gate into the city. And any person who would come in and have a case that he wanted to bring before the king, Avshalom would say, hey, where are you from? What city are you from? And the person would say, oh, I'm from such and such tribe. Your servant is from such and such tribe in Israel. And so Avshalom would say, your words, your case, it's legitimate. I just want you to know there's nobody here who's going to really hear your case on behalf of the king. Avshalom continued, would that I would be appointed as the judge in the land, and if people came to me, I would do justice for them, right? I would do justice for you. And if the person would then come and want to bow before Avshalom, right, a sign of deep respect, then Avshalom would instead lift that person up, right, and shake his hand and give him a kiss. He did this with every single person who would come in for a court case before the king, his father. Here's that phrase that we're starting to see, not gonev dat, not stealing the mind, but gonev lev, feeling those are interchangeable. And Avshalom stole away or won away the heart of the people of Israel. And this is just this small but really important story, because Avshalom is clearly trying to undermine his father's authority, and is manipulating, right, stealing away the hearts of all of the people of Israel. He's playing on perhaps some of their fears, right? And he's saying, well, no one's going to hear your case here, but I would hear your case, right? He's endearing himself to them in this way, and doing so, right, by saying, I would be a judge who would be in your corner. These other people, my father, he's not even going to hear your case. Right? And it's partly because of where you're from. Right? So we can imagine this happening, unfortunately, right, where someone's like, oh, whatever it is that defines you, this place isn't going to respect you, but I would.
Yes, yeah,
and so we get this.
In that, Ronit, there's so many very subtle ways that he's really playing on these people. Like you said, he's kind of tapping into fear or deep insecurity. So trying to elevate them in a way, but doing it in this kind of sneaky and underhanded sense. Like, it's not an outright lie. And I guess that's one of the points that I want to make, is that this Gnevat Lev or Gnevat Dat, it's not just that he's telling them utter lies, it's that he's kind of taking the truth and then warping it a little bit, like bending it, and that there's something sneaky in that. And then the last piece of it is this self-serving nature of it, that he's making it me, like I'm the answer to your problems, and I'm the one that really deserves to be held in esteem here. And as you were reading, I was listening to that phrase, like at the end of the third verse, where he says, there's no one assigned to you. It's like this dig on the king also.
Right.
Everyone else down, including in some ways the victim, and an elevating of self that's like behind this, this of Genevat Lev.
Well, that's interesting, because the last thing that he does is also, because you're saying he's even putting the victim down, but then physically lifting the victim up at the same time, right? When the victim actually, this person who's coming to bring the case, tries to bow to him in deference, he's like, no, we're on the same level, right? So a particular extra level of manipulation that's taking place here. Yeah, that's great. So much packed into this one, small section of Shmuel Bet of Samuel 2.
Totally. It's like if you could take him at face value, it would be great, but from reading the text that you can't. And if you keep reading a little bit, then you know that actually he is seeking the throne and trying to usurp David's power and trying to establish himself as king here. And when you understand that the whole thing is manipulative, it just feels so slimy. And I guess that's why the rabbis like their quintessential example here, because he's just so underhanded.
Yeah, and as you pointed out, part of it is it's based in truth, and I think those are in some ways the worst, the most egregious offenses, because if it's too far from the truth, then we see right through it. But when it's based in enough truth that you can twist it, you're actually changing a person's perception of reality. And I know when I've experienced that in my life, when I think a relationship is a particular way, and then I find out that somebody wasn't experiencing things the way that I thought reality was playing out, it feels very destabilizing. It's like, do I even understand how the world works, right? And so to play on that deliberately, right, and to use that to twist a person's experience of the world feels even more awful than just lying to someone outright.
Yeah, totally. And I think here you set it up well with the context of this very dysfunctional family. Like this kind of Geneva can take place within the confines of your own house, your own household.
Yeah.
It could be really close. As we move into the next text, we're going to see that the rabbis also imagine that it could be farther from you, and either one could be kind of a valid kind of Geneva. But certainly, in this time where we're Zooming and we're from our own house, from the place of our own homes, there's something about this that was really relevant. Like this can take place in the public sphere. This can also take place within the context of a family. A son is manipulating a father. It feels very relevant.
Yeah, so let's take a look together at what the rabbis do in the Gemara and Sota with this story.
Awesome. Okay, so in Sota, the rabbis are they're taking this particular story and now underscoring the point of just how bad this action is and lifting up the Geneva here, emphasizing it with, I think, 3 exclamation points as they emphasize just how problematic it is. So this little passage starts with them railing on Avshalom for all sorts of other reasons. They begin by talking about how excessively proud he is of his hair, and therefore he's hanged by his hair. They're mocking him a bit here, but they understand that one of the elements of what makes him a really villainous figure here is his pride. And then they're establishing a principle that we're going to see used with Geneva in just a moment, which is midah keneged midah. This idea that one action leads to another and that the two are in some way very closely related, that it's a punishment, it's the crime kind of a principle. So he's proud of his hair, therefore he's hanged by his hair. And it feels like there's kind of a poetic measure of justice in that. They bring the second example. He engaged in sexual intercourse with 10 of his father's concubines, and therefore these spears went into him. They're playing with the sexual imagery here. That's an midah keneged midah. And finally, they get to our example. Ulefi sheganav shalosh gnevot because he stole 3 stealings. He committed 3 acts of theft. Lev avot, he stole the heart of his father. V'lev beit din, the heart of the court, he's also manipulating. V'lev Yisrael, and the heart of the people of Israel, of the Jewish people. Shene'emar, as it is written, and we have the same proof text again. Vayiganev Avshalom et lev anshe Yisrael. Lefichach nitka'u bo 3 shvatim, shene'emar vayikach 3 shvatim bekapo, vayitka'a belev Avshalom. So therefore, because of this, because he did these 3 acts of stealing, at the end of his life, when he's killed, and this is like a piece of the story we haven't even gotten to yet, but there's yet more treachery going on here, and Yoav ends up killing him at the end of his life with 3 spears, as the verse says, and Yoav took 3 spears into his hand and thrust them through the heart of Avshalom. So they're imagining that each one of these spears corresponds to 1 act of Geneva, that this Geneva, the theft that he commits, the rabbis are now elevating that theft to a capital crime. Like it's really serious, which sort of echoes for us like what it is that Geneva is doing in the 10 Commandments. Because you could imagine some examples of theft not feeling like they belong in the Big 10, but this kind of Geneva, the rabbis are really understanding as these 3. He's manipulating his father, he's manipulating the court, he's manipulating the people. Each one of those is like a capital offense. Each one of those leads to a spear. And where does the spear go? Poetic justice directly into his heart. Sort of cuts right at the core here. So I think all of this is a way that the rabbinic text, what we're seeing here is that it's taking this category of Genevat Dat or Genevat Lev, again being used interchangeably, and taking Avshalom and his story of manipulation in a self-serving way with a bad motivation behind it, and really raising it up to be a very black and white, very clear-cut example of exactly the worst kind of Geneva you could possibly imagine.
Maybe it's not so black and white, right? I think these texts present a clear picture, right? Of the Tosefta says, don't do it. It is wrong. It is egregious. Avshalom, it is clear, right? And he's punished midah keneged midah. He is obviously 100% in the wrong. However, of course, right, this being the rabbinic tradition and this being human nature, then we make a little bit of a shift over to the Gemara in Chulin, where we're going to see some of these same cases, the same scenarios or very similar scenarios that the rabbis shared with us in the Tosefta earlier of examples of Genevat Dat, and now they're gonna maybe gray it up a little bit and complicate things for us. So Chulin 94a. Right, so sort of like the lead into this section is Shmuel said, it is forbidden to lignov da'at habriot, just the same language, to steal the mind of creations of all beings, and even this is important, right? He's being really explicit, even non-Jews. Right? This is not something that only applies to Jewish people. And I think what's relevant about that is sometimes back in the rabbinic tradition, the rabbis tended to really narrow who our responsibility was toward. And I think this does play out in one of the texts that we're going to look at in a little bit as well, right? This is such an important principle of being in the world that Shmuel and the Gemara want to explicitly say this applies to everyone, which habriot, right? All creatures seems to already imply. Tanya, Rabbi Meir Omer. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
If I can just say a quick word there, because there's this ... that I put in the text. So just a word about what's missing here. Because if somebody's interested in this topic, 94a of Chulin is like definitely the place to look for many of the classic examples. And it starts out with an example of like, you're paying somebody to ferry you across a river. How do you pay them? Well, if you're paying them with goods, trying to make sure that the goods, aren't goods that you're trying to pass off as incorrect or whatever. Many of the examples that come up on this page feel very similar to what we looked at in Chulin, in the Tosefta. So we're going to skip past that, but I just wanted to say there's a lot more there in terms of being able to flesh out this with some examples.
Taught in a Braita that Rabbi Meir would say, one may not open barrels of wine that were already sold to a storekeeper unless he notifies the guest. Right? So what's happening there? You can't show off your beautiful possessions, this gorgeous, beautiful, delicious wine that you have, just to show it to your guest. If it doesn't actually belong to you anymore, but you're misrepresenting it as if it belongs to you, unless you told the guest. And that seems pretty obvious, pretty straightforward. Okay, thank you, Rabbi Meir. And you may not say to another, anoint yourself with oil, place an empty jug before him, knowing that the person isn't going to take themselves up on it, right? So this is similar to inviting somebody to your home and knowing they're not going to say yes, and that's why you're inviting them. You really don't actually want them to come, but you're playing on this, or you're attempting to represent yourself as someone generous, as someone giving, but really you don't expect the person to do it. You know they're not going to do it. And so that lets you off the hook, right? You make yourself look good. But, and this is an important but, if he does so for the guest's honor, then it's permitted, right? So here we were talking about Genevat Dat over and over again, how wrong it is, how bad it is, and even the Gemara is setting that up, but then it's introducing the question mark. Well, what if my motivation is positive? And what if my intention is not to be self-serving, it's not to be manipulative, but it's because I want that person, even if I know they're not going to take me up on the offer, I want them to feel the kavod. I want them to feel honored by me, right? Another example, Tanu Rabbanan, lo yelech adam lebeit ha'avel ubiyado lagin hamit kashkesh v'lo yimla'enu mayim mipnei shemat'ehu v'im yesh sham chaver ir mutar. So a person may not go to a house of mourning with a wine jug, lagin, in his hand that's mostly empty, right? And misrepresent it as a full jug of wine. You also can't fill up that jug with water. You're misleading the mourner. I was thinking about this as Rachel and I were studying, and I was thinking, people tend to bring cookies to a house of mourning, although a good friend always brings fruit because she knows that what people are going to need in that moment is not more baked goods. But it's like bringing a half a box of cookies, but it's closed so nobody knows, and then you just put it on the table with all the other pastries, and everybody can assume that what you brought was a full box of cookies, right? So again, misrepresenting yourself. I'm so generous. Look at me supporting the mourner. Here we go, bringing some sustenance for them, bringing what they need. But again, if there's a crowd, chaver ir, it's permitted to honor, as the notes in here, the sort of filled in part of this text says, to honor the mourner in their presence, as opposed to coming empty-handed, perhaps, right? So again, asking us, well, why are we engaging in the manipulation? And that's something that we didn't really think about earlier. Maybe some of you did. But it feels like the text is really laying out black and white originally. And now we start to question, now we start to go inward. And with Avshalom, I think the understanding, and it seems pretty clear even from the base text, it's not just the rabbinic tradition. With Avshalom, it seems like it's self-serving. Right? It seems like there's perhaps revenge. He wants the leadership. He's not trying to replace his father and put someone else in place. Whereas here, there's a question of honor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that seems right on. Avshalom is so clear, and here the motivation is different. And it's like, if you're thinking about yourself, then Genevat Dat or Genevat Lev is really a problem. If your intention is that you're thinking about somebody else, then maybe it's not a problem, which means that it's very hard to, like in mathematical concept, you know, you have like the absolute value of a number, but it's very hard to take the absolute value of this behavior because it's not only about the behavior, it really is about what's underneath it. And maybe this is a good place to bring in the fact that there are so many other places, like for our tradition, lying is not seen as an absolute. It's definitely seen as wrong. And yet there are a whole lot of cases where you could imagine people lying, but for very pure purposes, where it seems like both biblical tradition, rabbinic tradition, and, you know, us today, like we would say, yeah, those are the kinds of lies that we want to see. And I'm wondering if you any of those, like I can think of a few examples and maybe we can bounce a few back and forth here, because I think it's useful to be able to say, not only is it not black and white, but there are even times where lying could be endorsed or helpful.
Yeah. There's the one place that the rabbis see it fairly early on in Torah is in Bereshit, when Sarah and Abraham are told that they are going to have a child at a very advanced age. And Sarah laughs in her heart, the Torah says, and she says, you know, how am I going to have a child? And, you know, and my husband is so old. And then God reports that to Abraham, that Sarah had laughed, which I always find problematic anyway, because it was her internal experience. So saying that aside, when God tells Abraham about Sarah's laughter, God leaves out the part where Sarah said that Abraham was old, even though, you know, he's nearing 100, in order to protect Abraham's feelings and in order to maintain shalom bayit, right, the peace in their home and the strength of their relationship. So that's one that I always think about, that God's self is being a little bit manipulative to protect Abraham.
Yeah, but it's seen as for a good purpose, for a good end.
Exactly.
I mean, I think another biblical example that kind of goes that way is the story at the beginning of Shemot, of Exodus, with the midwives. So Pharaoh has decided that all the baby boys are supposed to be killed on the birth stool.
Yeah.
And the midwives go and they're delivering babies. And instead of killing these babies, they're letting them live. And when Pharaoh's courtiers come to interrogate them and say, like, what are you doing letting these boys live? They say, oh, it's just that the Israelite women are, you know, chayot hein, like they kind of play on the fear here, sort of in the way Absalom was doing, play on like some, right. But they say, like, yeah, they're just animals and like we can't get there in time. And it's clear that that's a lie because they're there the whole time. But they're doing it in order to allow life to continue and not carry out this sentence, which is so clearly wrong in the eyes of the text and in the eyes of like any basic ethical code we might have. Like, we should, you know, on some inner level that killing babies is wrong. So they're doing it to preserve life. And so not only is it like not problematic, but, you know, sort of like with the example that you gave, God's doing it, you know, here the midwives are doing it and they deserve an awful lot of credit and praise. There's a sense that none of us would have, like the Jewish story wouldn't have continued from that point. People wouldn't have been redeemed from Egypt. Like none of that would have transpired had it not been for this religious action. So sometimes lying becomes even really positive in that sense. And
yeah, and not only is it praiseworthy and we can sort of infer that it's a positive, but it explicitly says in the Torah that God rewarded them and built them houses, right? So a fantastic example of deception for the ultimate in good reasons. And not only was it not self-serving, but they were putting themselves at risk, right? So, and we see the reward that God bestowed upon them for engaging in those lives. Yeah.
Awesome. Are we ready to the next text?
I think we are. Talk about gray.
Okay, perfect. So just to sort of review then where we have been, because maybe it's helpful for folks who are tuning into bits and pieces or half listening a little bit. We started with this category of, we started with the commandment itself, lo tignov, you shouldn't steal. We looked at how rabbinic tradition builds up genevat dat, or Gnevat Lev, the stealing of a mind, the stealing of a heart, this manipulative behavior, as being an ultimate example, the quintessential example maybe of what really problematic stealing looks like. And we looked at Avshalom as the par excellence case for what that kind of Gnevat Lev is. And it felt so very black and white because we saw Avshalom's behavior as problematic on so many levels all at once. And it was clear that he was stealing, and it was clear that the rabbis imagined this to be the capital offense. And then we looked at these last couple of examples in Hulin, where in a way it undermines the whole case. Like, actually engaging in these behaviors isn't totally problematic. It's only problematic if you're doing it for this reason, but not if you're doing it for that reason. And so we're starting to wonder, like, how solid is this category? And then you and I just came up with a couple of examples where manipulation or deception that otherwise feels very, very similar, but done for the right motives could actually be a positive. And now we want to end with looking at one example of Geneva. This is actually, we picked chapter 31 of Genesis to take a closer dive into, because this is the single biblical chapter that has the highest frequency of the word Geneva. Looking at Tanakh. So we have Geneva, 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 like stealing, stealing, stealing coming up all over the place in this chapter. And you might think that it's like the best example here, except that it's so gray. It's so muddy and it's so complicated because there is deception going on, but it's going to be deception, as we're going to see, in a whole lot of different ways and in a whole lot of different directions. Which maybe is a nice place for us to take this, because it's not always quite as straightforward as we might like to think. And thankfully, most people in the universe aren't quite like Avshalom in making things black and white. But many of us are a little bit like Yaakov, which is pulling these deceptions out in different ways with family members, with people that we love in our day-to-day relationships. And I think this gives us something to reflect on and to really think about when it comes to our own life. So hopefully friends who are tuning in know a little bit of the backstory of Yaakov. It's a complicated story, a complicated life, and we're not going to be able to go through all of it, but he is born already a trickster in a way. He comes out of the womb doing this Akev thing, this Yaakov thing of holding on to the heel of his older brother, like trying to pull his brother back into the womb. And there's a vying between Jacob and his twin Esau in childhood about who's going to be first, who's going to be the most important. And there's a lot of trickery that goes on in that relationship. Yaakov moves on into his adult life and meets the girl of his dreams, he thinks. And then the tricking gets pulled on him a bit, as it's set up with Lavan that he's going to work for 7 years in order to win the hand of Rachel, his beloved, the prize of his affection. And he works for these 7 years and thinks that he's there. And on the wedding night, seemingly kind of spontaneously in the moment, Lavan decides to swap out Rachel for her older sister. It's not clear if he's really meant to do that all along, or if that's a last minute decision. But in any case, Yaakov has a wedding and then realizes the next morning in this kind of like, oh shoot, way, like I married the wrong woman. And he's married Leah instead, and then works for another 7 years for Lavan. So there's this like base of trickery in the relationship. And so I think the important thing here is to know that Yaakov is both a trickster himself at heart, and also that he has this relationship with Lavan where Lavan has been the trickster. And the very last thing that happened before this chapter is that Lavan and Yaakov are preparing to go their own ways, and they're splitting up flocks. And there's some kind of strange thing going on with those flocks about which ones are going to be striped and which ones are going to be speckled, and a breeding of those flocks in order. It's not totally clear, but in order to, in some sort of way, make sure that Yaakov comes out on top. That's what it feels like is going on in the text. So there's some manipulation right before this. And it's in that context that Yaakov and his family are getting ready to split off from Lavan, that this text starts. I'm going to start reading from verse 17. Vayakom Yaakov vayisa et banav ve'et nashav al hagmalim. Thereupon Yaakov put his children and wives onto camels. Vayinhag et kol miknehu ve'et kol rechusho asher achash miknei kinyano asher achash befadan aram lavo el Yitzchak aviv arza Kenan. And he drove off all his livestock and all the wealth that he had amassed, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to his father in the land of Canaan. So it seems pretty straightforward as we start. Like Yaakov is getting his kids, he's getting all of his stuff, and he's getting ready to leave town. And then we hit verse 19, and we're going to see this word ganav come into the picture. V'Lavan halach ligzoz et sono. Meanwhile, Lavan had gone off to shear the sheep. V'tignov Rachel et hatrafim asher le'aviha. And Rachel stole the idols, the household idols that belonged to her father. So they're packing up to leave, and like, here's Rachel, like taking Lavan's idols and sticking them in her bags. This kind of ganav is the sort of ganav that we were imagining at the very beginning, in that straightest sense of like lo tignov. You shouldn't steal, you shouldn't take somebody else's stuff. And here's Rachel taking somebody else's stuff. It's even helpful that Shmuel in the Gemara had said that you're not supposed to do this even to Ovdei Kochavim. You translated that as like, even for non-Jews, but like literally even for idol worshipers. Because here, quite literally, Rachel is like taking the idols themselves. So you could see like maybe okay. She's stealing. And the next verse uses Vayignov again, but in a different way. Vayignov Yaakov et lev Lavan ha'arami, al bli higidlo ki voreacho. And Yaakov, I don't love the translation here. The translation says Yaakov kept Lavan the Aramean in the dark, not telling him that he was fleeing, but to go a little bit more literally. And Yaakov stole the heart of Lavan the Aramean, Lavan HaArami, by virtue of not telling him that they were leaving, that he was leaving. So there's two kinds of stealing here. There's the physical stealing of the idols, and then there's the stealing of, in this case, it's a little different, not straight deception, but more omission of important information, like really important information. Like, we're getting ready to split up the family and leave you now. And in doing that, there's a deception here and a stealing of Lavan's heart.
And one thing that I'm noticing as we're reading it together is the relationship matters. And what I'm noticing is, you know, at the beginning of Pasuk Yotet, verse 19, the Lavan holech, just Lavan is going to shear his sheep. But Tignov Rachel tetrafim asher la'aviha, Rachel steals her father's idols, right? So the relationship here, he's not Lavan, he's her father. Tignov Yaakov et lev Lavan ha'arami. Yaakov steals the heart of Lavan the Aramean. There's something relevant about each of these three different ways of referring to Lavan. And I think that fundamental to deception is that there's a relationship that has been set up, either a relationship of mutual manipulation, as in this case, or a relationship of general trust and love, as it seems like David and Avshalom have. And maybe that's part of what makes some situations more horrible in the eyes of the rabbis, is the nature of the relationship as well.
I love that idea, and I'm thinking about how this maps even back onto the Avshalom piece that we were talking about. Like, people come to Avshalom, and to use, you know, to really mix metaphors from across centuries here, to use Buber's language a little bit, of two different kinds of relationships, like an I-thou relationship where I'm really connecting to you as another holy person, you know, versus an an object relationship. Avshalom really, on a fundamental level, is viewing the other people as objects. Like, I'm going to use you to get what you need to get into power, but I'm going to make you think that I treat you as the thou, right? That I have like this deep human connection. I'm going to make you think
Yes.
that I can really hear your case and I believe that it's just and all that, when actually I'm simply using you, and that's part of the manipulation. And I think that's maybe what you're picking up on here, which is so powerful, that by calling him Lavan Ha'arami, he's like this other guy out there. And Yaakov is like, doesn't have regard for that other guy out there, for Lavan, and in a sense is using him, is using him to take all of the property, to take the family, and like, I don't care about what he thinks. I don't have to have regard for who he is. And it's not that he's not called Lavan his father-in-law, it's like Lavan me, and he's just this person. So that question, I think in relationships, we're all in them all the time. They become even more complicated when you're viewing them through screens, where it's like harder to read people's body language and all of that.
Right.
But work well when there's a trust that's mutual, and where everybody's understanding of what the relationship is the same. And when there's that differential, like, I think of you with this high esteem, but you think of me with low esteem, or vice versa, then we really actually do have a problem in the relationship. And maybe that's part of what's coming out here.
Yeah.
Cool. Can we just fast forward to the other bolded verses quickly, and then we'll...
Perfect.
Yeah. Great. So Lavan figures out that they're gone. He's told on the third day, a few days go by, he goes chasing after him. And this interaction where Lavan asks him, like, what happened here? What was this all about? The word tignov just comes up again, and it gets lobbied in yet another way. Vayomer Lavan Yaakov, me'asita v'tignov et levavi. Lavan says to Yaakov, like, what is it that you have done by stealing my heart? Vatinaheg et benotai kishavuyot charev, carrying off my daughters like captives of the sword. Now he's accusing him of like yet another kind of geneva, which is kidnapping, stealing of people. Lama nachbeta livroach, and why did you hide the fact that you were leaving? Vatignov oti, thus like stealing me, like something very essential about who I thought I was, and what I thought I had, and what I thought our relationship was, and you just broke out from under me, is the accusation that's here. Velo higadeta li b'ashlachecha b'simcha uv'shirim b'tof v'chinor. In secrecy and mislead me and not tell me, I would have sent you off with a party. I would have sent you off with music and all that. And like, now we're really confused, because would he really? Like, he didn't give up Rachel so willingly in the first place. And so this kind of throws into relief just how complex, as you said at the beginning, like a zone, just how complicated this relationship is, and how warped, and maybe there, makes us, the reader, think like, hey, there's manipulation going on in a whole lot of directions here. Right.
No, it's such a rich story. And I also noticed it feels like there's an element of midah keneged midah, the measure for measure that we saw in how the rabbis looked at Avshalom's story, right? Yaakov is deceptive, he is deceived. It's sort of a back and forth that keeps happening. And yet the rabbis don't use Yaakov as their example. They don't include him in that exploration of Genevat Da'at, even in a context of midah keneged midah, measure for measure, where it would make total sense, because it's so unclear, I think, right? Because he's behaving a particular way, he's getting the same thing back and forth, and they've entered into this cycle, and it's not 100% clear what his intentions are, or what Lavan's. It seems like maybe Lavan's intentions are more self-serving, but there's still something wrong. There's still something that Yaakov does here that's not okay. And you see that in Lavan's words, and there's, you have compassion for this person who, even if he has been manipulative in the past, it's still not right. And it still undermines his world and his perception of reality, and his identity and his relationships.
Totally.
Awesome. So what do we know about Genevat Da'at?
A lot of things.
Where does that leave us? Yeah.
We know an awful lot of things. I mean, I think during this time where we are spending so much more time at home and on our own, this is a wonderful lens for using to kind of put up as a mirror all of these stories and to ask ourselves some real internal and probing questions about ways in which we are currently or have in the past engaged in Geneva ourselves. Hopefully, none of us to the Avshalom level, maybe not even in that Yaakov and Lavan zone, I don't know. But I think
hopefully we do. Not.
Yeah, we do engage like all the time though in misrepresenting ourselves in very subtle ways. So I think this gives us like a really strong ethical framework for thinking about our own behaviors. Like that's one of the things that occurs to me. And then the other is that in the lead up to this election, during this election year, it's really clear to me that there's a lot of Genevat Dat that we can see in the public. A lot of people who are, in very self-serving ways and in manipulative ways, trying to change other people's estimations of them, but doing it in this underhanded way and through falsehood, through this kind of manipulation. And I think that this category helps us to underscore the notion that that can do tremendous damage, not only in the moment, like in all the fallout from it. It undermines that sense of trust and mutuality of relationship that's possible. Yeah, absolutely. And in some ways, this is the most egregious Geneva of them all, the most egregious theft. And we even see Lavan talking about all of this, everything that's taken from him, and the actual idols, the stuff of it. It's not where he starts. It's in some ways less important to him than everything else, right? So the damage you're speaking of, we might think Lo Tignov is about stuff, and the rabbis expanded that. Later commentaries say, is it also kidnapping? Is it taking of people? And then that's expanded as well by some of the later commentaries. And I think what we're presenting tonight, or early this morning, whenever you're watching, is that the Lo Tignov of the Aseret HaDibrot, of the 10 Commandments, is this as well. That there is stealing, there is theft that we can engage in that has nothing to do with the tangible, but really is relational and interpersonal, and can be as undermining to trust and to our society as any other tangible theft. Awesome. That seems like a great place to stop. Thank you so much, Ronit, for being an awesome study partner on this. And thank you, Rachel. It was a pleasure. For tuning in. Chag Sameach, everybody. Yeah, Chag Sameach.